Hello and welcome to the recording for the Invasive Species classroom presentation. My name is Lauren Bell. I'm the Education and Community Outreach Coordinator at the Invasive Species Centre, and I would like to thank Forest Ontario for helping coordinate the presentation. If you're not familiar with the Invasive Species Centre, we're a not-profit organization and we're located in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, with the goal of connecting stakeholders, knowledge, and technology to help prevent the introduction and spread of invasive species in Canada. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what an invasive species is, and then we're going to show some examples of invasive species, and then talk a little bit about what you can do to help prevent the spread of invasive species in your communities. So a species is considered invasive when it's introduced into an ecosystem outside of its native range, and it has potential impacts on the economy, the ecology, or the society in that introduced range. And so this second part is really important. A species coming from another place into a new ecosystem outside of its native range is not inherently invasive. It has to have this second step, or those potential impacts or harm on the ecology, the economy, or the society. And usually it has negative impacts on all three. So some of the characteristics of invasive species includes that first step, which is non-native to the environment. So again, it can't stop there. It has to have other characteristics. And these can include fast growing and reproducing quickly or in large quantities, a lack of natural predators in the environment that will slow its spread, and a lack of defense mechanisms in the native host species. So invasive species can move into an area outside of their native range through a lot of different vectors. And one that we're going to talk about right now is through shipping and cargo. So this is just one example of a common vector of spread, but in this one photo, there's a lot of different ways an invasive species can spread, and we're going to go through those. So for example, invasive species can exist in the ballast water of ships. When the ship takes the water up in its port of exit and then comes into a new port of entry, it can release that water, and in that water can be veligers of things like zebra mussels, for example, or invasive fish like round goby. And this is how we believe a lot of invasive aquatic species came into the Great Lakes. Invasive species can exist in the material that the imports are being packaged on, for example here with wood shipping crates, which is how we believe emerald ash borer was first introduced into North America. Invasive species can also exist on the outside of the boat itself, such as gypsy moth, for example. Or they can exist as attachments to the hull. Here we have zebra mussel as an example of being stuck to the bottom of the hull of the ship, and when it comes into a new port, those zebra mussels can release veligers and then create new infestations in that new area. As well as what the actual ship is bringing itself. For example, live pet and live plant trade can be a big vector for invasive species. Pathogens and pests and the species themselves can spread by accidental introduction or escaping cultivation or accidental or intentional release. And this can be a huge vector of spread for new introductions as well. So we talked about one example of how species can move into a new area, but there's a lot of others. For example, hiking and being outdoors can spread invasive species, such as plant seeds and pathogens that can exist on the bottom of your boots or on your pet's paws, for example. And when you don't clean your boots and you move into a new area, you can be spreading those without knowing. The movement of firewood over long distances can be a vector of spread too, as we don't always know what's inside of the firewood. Packing crates, which we talked about. Garden invasives, or planting of non-native invasive species, can spread when these species escape cultivation or are improperly disposed. They can spread into new areas and take over. As well as construction. For example, if Phragmites seeds were in the area and they got caught into the treads of the construction equipment, it can bring it to new areas. So in this day and age, increased trade and travel does promote the spread of invasive species across the world if we look at it in a global context. But let's scale it back a little bit and talk about it in an Ontario specific context. So when we look at Ontario as a whole, unfortunately, we are #1 for invasive species. Ontario has a really large population, and that population is located in a small area of the province, and it includes many ports of entry. And so this makes accidental introduction risks really high for things like invasive plants, pests, and other aquatic invasive species, for example. So in Ontario, we have 440 known invasive plants in southern Ontario alone, 39 known or potential invasive forest insects, 10 invasive tree diseases, and 180 known non-native or invasive species in the Great Lakes. So this graphic here depicts the invasion curve. This illustrates the feasibility of eradicating an invasive species over time. And as you'll see, the feasibility decreases over time to the point where it's no longer possible to fully control a species. So this red circle, this is where we like to focus at, which is before or at species arrival. So that could be arrival into Canada, into Ontario, or into your community specifically. Because the earlier a species is detected, the better. So now we're going to meet some of the species. We're going to start with an invasive plant. So this plant is Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed is native to Eastern Asia, and it was originally planted as an ornamental and used to stabilize riverbanks to help prevent erosion. So some of the key ID features are these alternating green lobed leaves you can see on the top right photo there. They alternate along the stem. As well, this species is very well known for its intricate root system. That root system can go up to 5 meters deep, and it gives the plant the rightfully earned nickname of iceberg plant because what you see above the soil is only a fraction of the true size of the plant. It sometimes is commonly confused with bamboo because it has a hollow stem, and that stem will stay up during the winter as well. It can withstand shade, high heat, high salinity, and drought, so it's very versatile and can survive in a lot of different climates. And the seeds of this plant rarely germinate because it spreads so well through the rhizomes or the underground stem. So it will get sprays of whitish, greenish flowers, which you can see in the top left photo there, and those typically appear around August. And so I mentioned in the beginning that a species introduced outside of its native range must cause harm to the economy, the society, or the ecology, and usually it harms all three. And so for each of the species, I'm going to go through some of those examples of some of those impacts. So the impacts of Japanese knotweed are it's very expensive to control, and management plans for this plant can be years long. It can break through concrete and damage infrastructure, as you see in the top right photo there. Those are juvenile Japanese knotweed coming up through the asphalt. And it sometimes is called asparagus plants because they have their resemblance to asparagus in their juvenile stage. Some of the societal impacts are it can take over an area, including public parks and trails. It can become very unruly and hard to manage. Ecological impacts include outcompeting of native species and quick reproduction through those minute rhizome sections or those underground stems, as well as degrading wildlife habitats. So this is the known distribution around the Great Lakes area. This is not by any means a definitive list of all the spots that Japanese knotweed is found, but this is the reported distribution. So it's found commonly along riverbanks, fences, and along homes. It's found all the way from southern to northern Ontario. The next species we're going to talk about is round goby. Round goby is an invasive bottom-dwelling fish that's native to Eurasia, and unfortunately this fish has invaded all 5 of the Great Lakes. It's believed to have entered North America in the ballast water of ships coming in. And so some of the key ID features you can see in the graphic on the top right. So those round, blunt snout, which you can see in the top there with the thick lips and no barbels. It also has a fused pelvic fin, which you can see on the bottom there, which separates it from some of the native species like the native sculpins. And the most common key ID feature is the black spot on the back of the first dorsal fin, which you can see. You can see the black dot again on this other photo, and that's going to always be there if it's a round goby. So if you see that, it's a very good sign that it's a round goby. And so some of the economic impacts are decrease to commercial fishing due to reduced numbers of harvested fish species. Round goby is very aggressive and it will eat a lot of different things, but its diet includes small fish and eggs of other fish. And so that kind of ties in with the societal impact, decreased opportunities for recreational fishing due to reduced sport fish populations. Because round goby is such an aggressive eater, it will eat those fish, reducing populations, which has a societal and economic harm. Ecological impacts include it can spread avian botulism, which is causing the die-off of different waterfowl, as well as it outcompetes native species for food. They eat large quantities of things like zebra mussels and quagga mussels, other insects, other small fish, and fish eggs. So this is the known distribution of round goby in the Great Lakes. As I mentioned, it is found in all 5 of the Great Lakes, and it's also found in some inland lakes and rivers like Lake Simcoe and the Trent River. And they can spawn several times in a season, so this helps their population expand very quickly. So the next species we're going to talk about is dog strangling vine. So dog strangling vine refers to 2 invasive plants in the milkweed family, and they're known as black swallowwort and pale swallowwort, and both of these are native to Eurasia. So we're going to be focusing on pale swallowwort, but they're actually so similar that they do share a common name, which is dog strangling vine. This species is restricted under the Ontario Invasive Species Act, and so is Japanese knotweed. It's native to Asia, and it was believed to have brought over in about the 1800s. It stands 1 to 2 meters high, and similar to a lot of other invasive plants, it outcompetes native ground covers. The plant has oval leaves with a pointed tip. You can see in the bottom right photo here, about 7 to 12 centimeters long, and it has a star-shaped pink to purple flower and about 4 to 7 centimeter long bean-shaped seed pods, which you can see in the top right there, which have a similar appearance to our native milkweeds we're more familiar with. So some of the impacts of dog strangling vine include closure to public parks and walking areas. It forms dense mats on the floor, on the forest floor, which can be really hard to walk through and creates a really large tripping hazard as well as human health hazard and pet hazard when people try to walk through it. And so it can be very costly to remove, and that ties in with the societal impacts, creating tripping hazard to people and pets, closure of popular hiking trails and things like that, and taking over of wild areas, which can make it dangerous for people that are working in those areas, such as hydro workers, for example. Some of the ecological impacts are it strangles out young saplings, and it does outcompete native ground covers. A really important ecological impact is its reduction of monarch butterfly populations. So the adult butterflies will confuse dog strangling vine for a native milkweed because it is in the milkweed family, and it will lay their eggs on the underside of the leaf, but the larvae can't complete their life cycle and they will eventually die. So this has had a detrimental effect on the monarch butterfly populations, unfortunately. And as well, the leaves and the roots of this plant can also be toxic to deer and livestock, but the good news is that grazing animals do typically avoid this plant. This is the known distribution around the Great Lakes area of dog strangling vine. As you can see, it's found along roadsides, ditches, fields, railroads, and trails. It can be accidentally spread by humans, but it can also be spread by wind as well. Next species we're going to talk about is not currently detected in Ontario, and this is the Asian longhorn beetle. The Asian longhorn beetle is an invasive forest pest, and it's believed to have originally come to Canada on woodpacking crates, and it's native to China and the Korean Peninsula. This species targets hardwood trees, and that includes poplars, birches, willows, and the very important maple tree. The beetle is typically about 2 to 4 centimeters in size, and it has no natural predators. So native beetles can easily be confused with Asian longhorn beetle, especially the white-spotted soil beetle, which is sometimes called the pine bug. These native soil beetles are a lot smaller, and they only feed on the stressed, dying, or cut conifers like pine trees. So that's really important because Asian longhorn beetle does not target conifers, and it has no preference for sick or dying trees. It will attack a healthy hardwood. So some of the signs and symptoms to look for includes oval-shaped egg pits dug onto the trunk, the branches, or the exposed roots where the adult beetle will lay its eggs. Leaking sap from the tree, large round exit holes like you can see in the bottom right, yellowing of leaves, premature leaf drop, and branch dieback, which you can see in the top left. And so the most serious damage is done during the larval stage. Increased woodpecker activity can also be a sign, and that's because the birds are looking for the larva under the bark. The adult beetles will emerge in the summer and they'll feed on the twigs and leaves, and then they'll lay their eggs that hatch about 2 weeks later. And this exit hole is what's made when the adult emerges. The adults can begin to emerge in May through to July when they will lay their eggs on those egg pits, and those are created on the tree and they'll lay up to about 80 eggs. And so these large exit holes impede the tree's ability to take up nutrients, leading eventually to the tree death. Some of the economic impacts include a huge loss for the forestry sector, of course, and the maple syrup industry, impacts to the tourism industry, and it's very costly to manage. Some societal impacts include loss of culturally important trees like the maple tree, and some ecological impacts include loss of important tree canopy and loss of habitat for birds and mammals. So the establishment of Asian longhorn beetle in Canada would be detrimental to the maple syrup industry. Of course, it's a very important industry to Canada, worth approximately $494 million. And so investing in early detection and prevention is very important. So as of 2014, Canada had spent an estimated $35.5 million preventing the spread of Asian longhorn beetle. There's many actions that you can take to help prevent the introduction of invasive species, and these are just a couple of them. So for example, making sure that you're not dumping your bait if you're fishing within 30 meters of the shoreline, or disposing of them properly in proper waste receptacles. Making sure you're cleaning your boots and outdoor gear every time that you're going outside and enjoying the outdoors. You don't want to be bringing potential plant seeds and pests and pathogens back with you. Buying and burning local firewood and never transporting firewood over 80 kilometers. And always making sure to choose native species to plant in your gardens. And so with that, we've come to the end of the presentation. I just wanted to mention, if you're interested in learning more about invasive species, you can visit our website, which is invasivespeciescentre.ca. As well, if you visit our website, you can sign up to receive some of our media items, which include our quarterly newsletter, our bi-weekly media research and event scans, and our event and webinar invitations if you're interested in learning more about invasive species. I'd like to thank you for listening to the presentation, and I hope you have a great day.